Hello and welcome. My name is Joe O'Mara. I'm the Head of Aviation Finance with KPMG. And on behalf of KPMG and Airline Economics, I'm delighted to be joined today by Michael Steen and Eamonn Forbes. Gentlemen, before we get into the meat of the conversation, Michael, would you just give yourself a brief introduction and tell us a little bit about Atlas Air and Titan Aviation Leasing?
Of course. First of all, thank you, Joe, for having us. We're delighted to be here. And my name is Michael Steen. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the Atlas Air Worldwide Group and the Chief Executive Officer for Titan Aviation Leasing. And as I think many of the listeners know, the Atlas Air Worldwide Group is the world's largest lessor and outsourcing provider of freighter aircraft. On the Atlas side, of course, being the second largest operator worldwide, just ranked after FedEx when it comes to FTKs operated. We operate the fleet with more than 120 aircraft, over 4 different aircraft platforms. And it's a very diverse operation as well, with customers spanning from direct shippers through e-commerce platforms, freight forwarders, and airlines. And on the leasing side, Titan Aviation Leasing has grown to become one of the top 3 freighter lessors worldwide, with a portfolio value of more than 1.5 billion. And we're also very, very pleased about our partnership together with Bain Capital Credit, where we're now building up a further platform here of freighter aircraft. And we're delighted to be with you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Eamonn, do you want to say a quick hello and just your role within Titan?
Thanks, Joe. Well, of course. And Eamonn Forbes is my name, and I am the Chief Commercial Officer of Titan Aviation Leasing. As Michael mentioned, we are a 35 aircraft strong freighter leasing company. And we are most certainly in growth mode. Through 2021, we attracted new customers, we attracted new aircraft, and I'm pleased to say we attracted new team members. So it's onwards and upwards for 2022, Joe.
Great, thanks, Eamonn. And Michael, I might start with you because we're doing a bunch of these conversations, but really interested in your views because it's coming out of that obviously slightly different market segment. Eamonn has spoken to that growth agenda, and a lot of that speaks to probably the macro environment you're operating in. Would you mind just talking us through where do you sit in the context of growth from a freighter perspective? And interested in your thoughts as well, where we've seen probably spiky periods of growth in cargo and freighter over the years. There's probably a coming belief that we're seeing here is a real and sustainable step change. So would welcome your thoughts around those points.
That's a great question, Joe, and obviously a question that a lot of people are looking at as well in order to understand how the future will change and has changed with the pandemic, speeding it up. I think that there are several different drivers to that. First of all, if we think about global freighter, or let's say freight transportation, in normal times up until 2019, about 50% of all air freight globally was shipped in passenger bellies and 50% on freighters. It has been like that for decades. They're just shifting a couple of percentage points. Now, of course, as the pandemic hit us in the early part of 2020, that changed completely. We grounded, let's say, the entire intercontinental wide body belly capacity, except for the freighters, so the passenger aircraft operating as freighters that came back to the market. But it took out a big chunk of the global capacity. Now, I think it's widely expected that that wide-bodied belly capacity will change in its structure over the next several decades, based on the fact that in order to get back to 2019 levels from a passenger perspective, a lot of things has to happen when it comes to immunization, obviously airlines being solvent enough in order from a capital perspective, in order to invest in new assets, and passenger travel demand has to come back to the same levels as well. And that will take some time. So that capacity is definitely one driver here. We should also say that all the capacity on the wide body freighter side that could fly and could be in the market is currently in the market and operating at very high levels. That's globally for all companies. Now, shifting forward and thinking about then what other drivers are there? Well, the global supply chain is a bit on its head at the moment as well. If you look at the challenges that the ocean shipping side has, with extremely long lead times, congestion at ports, lack of labor, the pandemic impact on that labor as well. And that is stretching inland as well when it comes to availability of containers, truck drivers, And as the ocean shipping supply chain are having problems, that of course has a positive impact on air freight demand. So demand has increased throughout the pandemic, and we are currently well above the levels where we were in 2019. So lower capacity availability, higher demand, record low inventory levels across all major industries, and a continued consumer demand. And that's a third level that's driving air freight demand, and that's the change in consumer behavior using the e-platform to a larger degree. And we have really had a paradigm shift there when it comes to B2B to B2C. And that has, of course, forced the e-commerce platforms to invest in their own capacity, both intercontinentally as well as regionally and domestically. So I think we are seeing here, whilst there are a lot of challenges going through the pandemic, which is impacting all of us, right? Even if demand is high, our cost is increasing, and there are labor challenges, both on the ground as well as in the air. Those are complexities that needs to be dealt with. I think that from an air freight demand perspective, over the next several years, we will see a really good demand, maybe not at the peak levels that we're seeing now, that will taper off a bit and temper, but we will definitely see good demand in air freight going forward.
So I think, yeah, very interesting stuff there. And as you say, fundamentals that would point to a real and sustained change. And Eamonn, you were mentioning there about the plans and the focus on growth. When you look at your customer base, have you seen that evolve post-pandemic? And can I also ask, when you're assessing your new transactions with your customers, what fundamentals are you considering and thinking about, and have they been shifted in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, good question, Joe. So firstly, I think it's important to point out that over the last 3 or 4 months, we've actually been able to get out to the customer. We've been down in Latin America, we've been over in the Middle East, we've been throughout Europe, we've been into Africa, we've been in North America to really test the pulse and to really try and understand those drivers. Now, they differ from place to place, from region to region, from customer to customer. But the fundamental common theme is one of increased demand, one of a slight change in consumer demand. So you have the airline demand for the aircraft, but that's been driven predominantly by consumer and by business demand. So I think the fundamentals of leasing, whether you're leasing a freighter or a passenger aircraft, remain the same: asset, jurisdiction, counterparty. But in our case, when we're looking at it from a freighter perspective, we do look a little bit more under the hood, because ultimately the people that we're dealing with are telling us that they need an aircraft because of this consumer or business-led demand.
Just add on that, Joe, if I can, because there is a shift that has happened here throughout the pandemic as well, and that is that the type of customer has changed. And I alluded to that in the opening here as well. And if you look at the diversified position that we have as a group, we now have manufacturers of different products, right, in the high-tech sector that are leasing aircraft directly from the Atlas Air Worldwide Group, right? They would historically, of course, work with an intermediary who would work with an airline who would fly the freight for them. The pandemic has shifted that, and they are now taking greater interest in controlling their supply chain and controlling their capacity. And that is something that makes our value proposition as Atlas and Titan very, very attractive, of course, because we can not only lease the aircraft for that customer or to that customer for a longer period of time, we operate the asset as well.
And you mentioned metal a little bit earlier. When you're thinking about your future strategy, Michael, and your growth along those areas, what are you viewing as your most investable metal? So where are you what horses are you backing?
Well, the good news for us is that we can double bag a bit here, as we say, right? We can bet on several horses. We have, let's say, 4 different fleet platforms or fleet types that we operate today on the Atlas side, from the 737 up to the 777, 74, 76 in between. And from a Titan perspective, we are really agnostic across those 4 platforms. And we're looking with great interest, of course, at what Airbus are producing, then predominantly first the converted aircraft, but now also increasingly as they're presenting the new wide-body freighter, the 350. that will come out later in the decade that's really showing some great promise. For us, metal is actually secondary. The customer is primary. And that's where we take a novel approach as well. We understand the customer's network, their fleet requirements, their infrastructure, and their supply chain. That is really what we're looking at, because having that understanding and knowledge is what drives our decisions as far as which assets we will invest in. We will, of course, at the same time, take a look at the residual value of the respective assets and how that will play out in later decades, etc. But for us, it really starts with the customer.
And Eamonn, to take it to the leasing side, you look at the passenger side and we see a really, really competitive environment, right? Where there hasn't been a significant move between lease rate factors pre and post pandemic. That early bounce has probably gone away. As you're going out now and placing aircraft, is it the same level of competition, or there's probably significant barriers? You can't have an aircraft lessor look to flip and do freighter. It's a slow process if they wanted to do that. And it's a different type of expertise in managing that aircraft. How are you finding it from a competitive environment perspective in the freighter leasing market?
Yeah, look, it's extremely competitive as well. We have a number of competitors, but what we try and do, and I think we've mentioned this, we try and set ourselves apart. We try and differentiate ourselves, that we're not just coming to the table with an aircraft here. We're coming to the table with all of the expertise, all of the knowledge of Atlas and what they bring, as well as the financial strength that Bain brings to the table as well. You bring all that together and you sit down with the customer, and as we alluded to, it's not just about coming up and saying, right, it's going to be X 100,000 per month for 8 or 10 years. It's really about getting to understand their network, getting to understand what they're actually putting on the aircraft. Is it cherries from Latin America? Is it perishable food from Egypt? Whatever it happens to be. It's to really understand all of that. And then we can bring that and we can plug that in to the broader Atlas network as well. And that's where we add significant value. So it's certainly not the same. And I spent 15 years on the passenger side. There's a significant difference. But that's really aided and abetted by the fact that Atlas has this huge experience in the global air freight.
And on the freight side, Michael, again, we look at the passenger side, we see a clear uptick in the percentage of leased aircraft. We've decimated airline balance sheets, leasing to some of the points Eamonn's talked about. They've actually built very strong relationships or deepened relationships with their lessors over the last 20 months. And there's probably an expectation that we're going to see that trend line definitely continue for the next couple of years. Your thoughts on the freighter leasing side? Are there similar items out there that they're going to push an increase in the use of leased assets?
I think there are a lot of similarities for the established operators, right? So if you look at the combination carriers, they're one and the same. They obviously have the same relationship with lessors on the passenger side as they have on the freighter side. So I think that will definitely continue. It depends on the airline in question or the operator in question about the strength of their balance sheet and how they're going to leverage that, their cost of capital, and how to manage risk and balance risk, right? So I think those trends will continue. Then you have this new group of customers coming in as well, and whether they're ocean shipping lines that are buying aircraft now and changing their strategy a bit. That's of course a new entrant as well. We'll have different views on how to do that, likely use their own capital to begin with at least. And you have the e-commerce platforms that take an approach here that is different as well. Some want to own their assets, others want to lease the assets, and the third one to have a completely integrated ACMI solution. But I think on balance, I think that we will see a very similar landscape as to what we have seen in the past 5 to 10 years.
Okay, as you're looking at the debt side, how has that evolved for you guys over the last 2 years or so? We'll come on to Bain and the investor side in a minute, but if you look at the debt side on the balance sheet, what kind of channels are you accessing or planning to access over the next kind of 12, 24 months?
Well, that is a discussion that we are having at the moment as well, as you can imagine, right? First of all, as a group, our performance has been great. Our net leverage ratio, we have worked that down to very low levels. which has been a target of ours as well. We've obviously increased or strengthened our capital position, and that now puts us in a position that we have some good choices to make as we go forward. So that's something that we will obviously get to here as we get into 2022. Now, from a Titan perspective, I start there, and Eamonn, please chime in a bit later. We have a fantastic partnership with Bain Capital Credit. We have a strong capital position there as well that we are investing in or using prudently as we're looking at those investments. But the interesting thing is that there is obviously a great excitement around freight now, and that gives us, and particularly with the position that we have as a group, some really interesting opportunities as we look at how to continue to invest further. But for us, as always, it's going to be underscored by creating great value for our customers and great value for our shareholders as well.
Eamonn, do you want to come in on that? And maybe particularly, as Michael mentioned, you've got that Bain partnership there. We've seen private equity loves aviation, and it loves it an awful lot, I'd say, even since the pandemic hit, potentially even more. How are you finding that relationship and their outlook from a medium or longer term perspective in the partnership you guys are building with them?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is it is a long-term partnership, and that's how Bain are viewing it. From a relationship perspective, it's an extremely positive relationship, and they have been behind us in really everything that we have done. They want to grow the platform, and we're here to really facilitate that. I think having a partner like Bain who actually understand the business as well is a huge help, and certainly goals and objectives are completely aligned between the two shareholders. So extremely positive. Can I add one thing? You spoke about the debt side, Joe, and I think historically banks would have looked at the freighter market with a relatively narrow lens, and there's no doubt, and we have some excellent banking relationships in Titan, but there's no doubt that the phone is ringing a lot more than it used to be. And there are certainly, that your blue chip aviation banks are all now focusing a lot more on the freighter market. And look, what do we want? We want, we want to be represented the same way as a new passenger aircraft. LTV should be high, margins should be low.
And one thing to, if I can just chime in on one final point there, Joe, and that is how the different stakeholders will engage here. And of course, as economic cycles, they change on the passenger side, the rapidness of the involvement there of lenders and providers of debt, for example, while that could, of course, be translated into freight as well. But freight is different. Freight is different to the extent that you have to understand the deployment of the aircraft in order to get the best unit cost out of them. There is going to be a lag time as well when you convert aircraft, right? And that is an area where we're seeing a lot of focus at the moment in various platforms, right? And there's going to be a significant downtime of those aircraft. So timing of deployment needs to be critical. It is different if you sit on a portfolio of aircraft that you have nothing else to do with on the passenger side and you then try to convert them and place them in a market. Well, the market may or may not be there for those aircraft at that particular point in time. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier about having that understanding from a customer perspective as to timing that correctly as well, and consequently getting the best return on the investment.
And just that point around conversion, well, how do you view that space, right? So obviously you're not new to this game, you've been in an awful long time. When you talk to some other investors, as you say, buying naked aircraft, great plans, I'm going to convert this and move it over, but finding a slot then is a different kettle of fish. When you look at your approach when you get to conversions, and just your thoughts on the wider market, so wider than you guys, just how challenging it is to actually get the right slot at the right time and deliver, as you say, without that significant or overly significant downtime.
It's extremely important, Joe, and that is where we have seen now, of course, the tendency of lessors who have aircraft with no other deployment. They take on a conversion slot, right, and then hope that there's going to be demand for it afterwards. That may or may not happen, right? We are taking a slightly different approach to it, and that is that we have these parallel track discussions going on with customers that we know have demand for a certain aircraft type. parallel track that with discussions with the conversion shops, and then obviously asset acquisitions as well. And timing that is an art, and it's something that it isn't easy. There's a risk, of course, that there is going to be a saturated market for certain aircraft types, right? And that's something to watch out for. We're seeing the conversion houses now increasing their capacity, which is great news. And there's also more competition coming into the market. So, for example, Mammoth has now entered the market when it comes to the 777-300 P2F, right? So that's good. We have two now houses doing that, and maybe a third one as well. We're seeing competition now on the A321 side, and the 737-800 we had pretty good competition to begin with. So there is slot availability, and certainly for the more attractive future aircraft, I think we are not concerned about that situation. It's more a matter of timing, as I mentioned earlier.
And can I ask you, Michael, the existential threat the world has, and aviation by significant extension, is around climate change and ESG. We've talked to kind of the investor side and the debt side and the metal side. How do you see the climate change agenda impacting on your business and across the various facets of it right now? And how do you see that changing in the near term?
Well, first of all, it's an extremely important focus area, right, for us existentially as an industry, but for the humankind as well. So it's something that we first as a group are fully focused on. Our ESG strategies can continuously develop, whether it's on the operating side, on the Atlas side of the house, or as Titan. And we're working closely with our customers on that as well. I have the pleasure of serving on the IATA Cargo Committee. And there we have sustainability as one of the three core pillars from an industry perspective. And that goes, of course, with a focus on every single aspect of what we do on the freight side. And if we think about the freighter types that we have, some of them will stop production, right? Like the 777 and 767 here by 2027. And after that period of time, you can operate the aircraft, but it will no longer be produced. And obviously there will be others taking over. But it's something that we as an industry really need to focus on more broadly, right? To make sure that we can meet the targets that has been set here by 2050, for example, and make sure that we contribute towards that. And the choice of aircraft that we invest in is certainly going to be a key driver for that.
And Michael, I know we're conscious of your time. I'll go back to you in just one second, Eamonn. Can I ask you just before you drop off, what are your optimism levels like? As you look out over 2022, we've had a very, very challenging 21 months. You're obviously in a market segment that has weathered a little bit better. How are you looking at next year from that optimism perspective?
Well, it's a great question. I think, first of all, I'm looking at it optimistically from an air freight perspective. I think that we will see a 2022 that has continued demand with lower capacity available in the market that we see now, because it's going to take time before we really get to grips with the pandemic, and that we have let's say aligned approach around the industry, particularly on the passenger side, from an open border perspective, and thereby getting some normalcy back into the business and the pent-up travel that is out there going again. My belief is, however, that will take time. And we have seen it here over the past month and a half, from borders being completely open on the transatlantic in the early part of November to where we are today, right? So there are a lot of things that we don't know. We don't know the next turn of the pandemic and how that's going to impact the industries. And from a freight perspective, whilst demand is high and the outlook is positive, there are also challenges, and that comes from how we run the operation and the restrictions that are being imposed. There are some overnight, and that is something that we have a hard time predicting, and that we have to have a good resiliency structure for, so we can respond to it accordingly. But the outlook from a cargo perspective in 2022 remains quite positive.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I know you have to drop, so I'd like to really thank you for your input today and wish you all the best in 2022, and hopefully we get to catch up again in person soon.
Well, first of all, I'm looking forward. Thank you for the chance of speaking to you here, and thank you as an organization for the support throughout the years. And we're looking forward to seeing you in person in Dublin here in January. Let's make sure we stay on track for that one. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Eamonn, pulling it back to one of the comments you made earlier, if I could, around the competitive landscape that you face. Can you talk to us a little bit more about who are the players that are out there, and are there particular barriers? Michael mentioned, companies. I've got a glut of aircraft. I know there's cargo demand. Yeah. Maybe I can push myself towards conversion.
Yeah, there's no doubt, Joe. I mean, and we have numerous examples of what would be described as historically passenger-centric aircraft leasing companies who are now delving into the passenger to freighter market. But yet there have also been large players historically, and they remain and they're growing. So we're out there competing not only with the new entrants, but also with a number of parties who, like ourselves, have been around for 10, 15, 20 years. So if anything, I would say things have become more competitive, but on the upside, demand has also increased. So there's probably, I would say, more parties will come to the table, in my view, in 2022, and not less. I think that unlike the passenger side, we're not seeing consolidation. Will we see it in 22, 23? We might. But heretofore, that has not been the case in the freighter leasing market. So for me, it's going to be increased competition, but you have to balance that with the fact that we really see increased demand as well.
And as you're with that ambitious strategy to grow your balance sheet and grow your aircraft, is that via order book? Is that via acquiring, I suppose, on the sale and leaseback side, but portfolio acquisition of used aircraft? What way do you see the growth coming?
Yeah, it's going to be in a number of different lanes, Joe. It's going to be buying aircraft for conversion. We convert them, we lease them on. It's going to be buying existing freighters with lease attached. It's going to be buying portfolios. And we would not rule anything out, because in order for us to grow, we have to look at all the options. And I think as a management team, that's the prudent thing to do. The capital is there, the ambition is there, and I think we have a number of different lanes that we can attack.
And can I ask you, maybe bring it local for a sec, two Dublin-based people here. You've obviously looking at expanding out the Dublin footprint. How are you finding the efforts to grow that office in Ireland?
Yeah, look, there's a huge pool here, which has been built up over a long number of years, whether it's legal, technical, financial, or indeed in the sales side. So, the talent is in Dublin. There's no doubt about that. It's about getting the right talent. Now, we had a huge response to some recent recruitment that we did. I would expect that, given what's going on in the broader industry, that talent, while it should stay in Dublin, we may lose some of that talent to other industries as well. And I think we should be cognizant of that, having spent time, effort, and money in training people in whatever discipline it happens to be in aircraft leasing, that we try and keep them in the industry.
And just in closing, to ask you that question, you said you'd be on the passenger side for a long time. I mean, we won't say exactly how long, but on the passenger side for a long time through various guises and iterations. What difference have you seen having moved to the freighter side? What are the fundamental differences, or are there fundamental differences to your commercial role in your former lives?
Yeah, I think I think the cadence of the deals is slightly quicker on the freighter side. I think that deals get struck and they get closed a little bit faster, I would say, is one thing. I think that one of the more interesting parts for me is that, because you have to understand the unit cost of the freighter, there's a lot more, I think, analysis and understanding ultimately of what's driving a customer's decision. And to that end, that only helps your overall understanding of the customer itself, because we know what it costs per ton to ship something from China to the US. And so we can get underneath the skin of the customer. And I think on the passenger side, there wasn't as much focus on, maybe cost per seat per mile, as there is on the cargo ton kilometers on the freighter side.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm learning as we go here as well, I'm not going to lie to you. But listen, I'd like to thank both yourself and Michael for all your insight and inputs today. Look forward to catching up soon, and I wish you, Titan Atlas, all the best in 2022.
Well, thank you, Joe, and have a great holiday and a great new year, and we'll see you in 2022.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.